Arcade Heroes.
Hey everybody, this is Adam with ArcadeHeroes.com, here to present to you some interesting news on some upcoming arcade games, or possibly upcoming arcade games. And let me start this off with a big disclaimer. That disclaimer is that all of the content that's shown in this video may change significantly by the time it's released, or if it's released. And if it's released, it needs a big underline under it, as well as there's a lot of instances in the arcade industry where there is a game that is shown off on test and then it's never released, never seen again. Sometimes those games show up at trade shows where a lot of people within the industry see them. One example is Mario Party Challenge World by Raw Thrills, which is something we only saw at IAPA 2017. It showed up on location test a few times under a very different cabinet and different gameplay, but eventually was canceled. And along those lines, one of these recent vlogs that I did about an upcoming game, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Deluxe, I found out that that has been canceled. And so that would have been the only instance that if you attended to that particular arcade and got a chance to try it out, that you would have seen what that was like. But I can confirm that that has been canceled. And so that may be the case with the two games that I'm going to talk about today, both of which also happen to be Raw Thrills games. And so Raw Thrills has been a very busy company as of late, and this year they have released titles such as Nerf Arcade, Slither.io, and some other content, but yeah, we never know what they might end up bringing to market or not. First off, I'm going to start off with a game that was covered on ArcadeHeroes.com back in June, and that would be the world's largest Frogger. And this was first covered on June 14th. I was sent this photo by an anonymous tipster, and they said that they stumbled across this machine on test, and it was a very early test, and I think it was actually something that had just been put out a very, very short time before the photo was taken. As you can see, it was so early that the control panel still showed Pac-Man on it, and this would have been based on the world's largest Pac-Man, which has been available in arcades since 2016, the very end of 2016, and so just the software and the marquee had changed. But haven't heard anything else about this one yet, nothing to really confirm, so you can always check out the post if you want to read the details. But it uses the same system as world's largest Pac-Man. Presents Frogger in a slightly different way than it was done in the classic sense. I mean, it still has those original, I guess you could say, retro graphics, if you will. Gameplay has changed as far as you can see there's two roads on here, one at the bottom, the river in the middle, and then a road at the top, and then another river or stream at the very top. There's only 3 places to capture the fly, or the little alcoves to get your frog to. That might change to 5, but again, since this is a very, very early test, it may not be released, or the software may change quite a bit. But I would assume that it would fit with a lot of other games that Raw Thrills has resurrected. They produced the world's largest Pac-Man, they also did Galaga, they've done Space Invaders, and in each of these instances they've changed up how the original worked, and Space Invaders are probably the most radical difference compared to what they did with Pac-Man or Galaga. And this one as well, where it needs to be able to handle co-op play, that they also have rounds instead of levels, and typically with these Raw Thrills titles you can play through one round and then it asks you for your initials, and I have seen instances where people get confused and think that that's game over, but if you didn't die, then you keep going and you play more levels beyond that. Of course, a lot of these have also been developed for redemption play, but in all of these instances that I've mentioned, they work for both amusement only, where you just play for points, play it as a traditional arcade game, or if the operator, the people who own the machine, decide that they want to just have it play for tickets, set it to that mode, and it's a lot simpler. Usually just one round and then a bonus or jackpot round where you try and get the big ticket mega bonus or whatever it is that they want to call it. So moving on from World's Largest Frogger, which again may or may not be released, here's another game which may or may not be released and may see significant changes to it before the final one, if again it is released. Sorry to keep driving that home, but just to any of you out there that may own or operate an arcade, please don't call up your distributors asking for information about this, because they will not know. Most people don't know about this, and so you're hearing it here first. And so if you work for a distributor, you're probably hearing about this before you've heard anything else. And so I guess that's been a little bit of a problem with some of the reveals that we've had lately, where a game is first revealed to the world, and then people start calling up the manufacturer, calling up distributors, wanting to find out more, but literally nobody knows except for the manufacturer themselves. Anyways, so here's the latest game from Rothrills. This is Star Trek Battleground, and I should preface this with growing up in the 80s and 90s, I watched a lot of shows, loved things like Star Wars and Star Trek, and I mainly grew up watching Star Trek The Next Generation, or TNG as it's usually known, but eventually found out about the original series, also known as TOS, and I watched Deep Space Nine and Voyager and Enterprise and all those. Haven't cared at all for Discovery, but I guess I could say I'm pretty well versed, a bit of a Star Trek nerd or a Trekkie. There's Trekkie and Trekkers, but we won't get into that. Yeah, this is the latest in a few Star Trek games that have shown up in arcades over the years. I have an article on Arcade Heroes from back in 2009, which gets into many of those games, like the Sega Star Trek game that came out in '82. We've had the Stern Star Trek Pinball, there was a Data East Star Trek Pinball, there was a much earlier Star Trek Pinball as well. Recently, Dave & Buster's had developed a pusher game that also vends cards, and that's unique to them. If you've been to a Dave & Buster's, you've probably seen it, but that's only Dave & Buster's, so that's why you haven't seen it anywhere else, but I've heard that's a pretty popular game. And also Dave & Buster's, for another exclusive they have that VR 4-player platform, that motion platform, and they recently, this year, they released a Star Trek game that was based on the J.J. Abrams films, also known as the J.J. Verse, or the Kelvin timeline, if you really want to get into all the nitty-gritty of the Trekdom there. But so Star Trek Battleground, and again, I think this will change significantly if it is released, because it does seem to be an amalgamation of various different series. So you have the original series, you have Next Gen in there, you have some elements that also look like they're from the JJ movies, and there's even a Starfleet symbol from the Star Trek the Motion Picture in there, and so I wouldn't be surprised if they might unify the theme down at some point or make some other adjustments to that as needed through testing. But one thing I did find out is this is a very early test, so we're finding out about this where it's literally just shown up on test for the first time, and the only thing that Rothrills could say about it is that this is what they would consider an alpha test, not even a beta test, and that's how early this is. And so it could be that this is still quite a ways out from when it would see a release if they decide to go forward with it, and depending on how earnings are. But yeah, so you've seen the cabinet here. One of the most distinctive things about it is it has this large saucer section canopy. From the Enterprise, you have it on both sides of the cabinet, a large saucer section, but then you also have right underneath the marquee, that big saucer. And I think there's one reason for the saucer on the front, and that's to provide a canopy over the playfield. Now, for the gameplay, from what we can tell, and again, I wasn't able to get a confirmation of this, but just looking at the pictures, which I'm throwing up on here, this looks a lot like those fishing games. So there's a lot of fishing games out there. Harpoon Lagoon was probably the first one that people really knew about here in the United States, but they've been big in China and Japan, so there's been a lot of different fishing games out there where it's an overhead view and you have all these objects. In those cases it's fish. In this case it's going to be iconic starships and spaceships from the Star Trek series. So you'll have Klingon bird of prey, you'll have Romulan bird of prey, there's a Ferengi ship in there that I saw, and you also have the Borg. And so this is where instead of it being fish, you just have all these spaceships going across the screen. And what you control is a saucer section of your Enterprise there. Don't know if they'll have different starships to choose from, but usually with these types of games, they don't make the player have to go through a lot of different selection. It's usually just swipe your card or insert your coins and start playing right away, as opposed to here's an option or whatever. And so they're a lot more casual as to how they work out. But so you'll have your enemies flying around the battlefield, the playfield there, going back and forth and probably being randomly generated. And what you do is you control the direction or angle of your saucer, of your Enterprise saucer, using a spinner or a knob, and then you use the big button to, I would assume, fire photon torpedoes, maybe fire phasers. I don't know which one it uses, but probably torpedoes, since those would be slower moving. And so you would also have some skill element there, so you have to lead your shots or lead your targets and time your shots properly. And so that is, as best I can tell, that's what you're aiming to do here, is just shoot as many enemies down as you can before the timer runs out. And then whatever you end up with, that's how many tickets you get. Now, since this is going to be a Videmption game, probably Videmption only, I can't imagine that this would have an amusement mode to it, because those fishing games generally do not have that. You're going for the big ticket jackpot. In this case, they call it the Borg bonus, and this is one of those things where they've taken TNG but also mixed it with the original series. And of course, any series Trekkie knows that Captain Kirk never came across the Borg, but whatever, it's okay. It's all Star Trek, right? And so the Borg bonus, however that works, I would assume that it would probably take a lot of shots to try and take that down. Is what you can use to win up to a certain number of tickets. And now what you see here, that's also something that would likely be adjustable by the site operator, as opposed to a fixed solid thing where all units are going to only give out 750 tickets if you get that bonus. Now, in the upper portion of the screen, and now this is also where we can get into something that's unique about this, is that, and the reason for that big saucer section canopy, is that this uses projection mapping technology. Now, the first time that Raw Thrills had dealt with this was with that unreleased Mario Party Challenge World that first showed up as a 6-player game, and was very elaborate as far as how the projection mapping in the playfield worked. Gameplay was very simple. Actually, it wasn't much of a game. It was more of a gambling machine at the first time that we saw it. Later on, it changed to something a little bit more of a redemption game, but it still went unreleased. Still had projection mapping, still had depth on the playfield, but again, they just didn't release it. They've taken that idea and that technology and applied it to this. Now, the playfield, as far as I can tell, has depth on the planets. There's at least 3 planets that are there, or maybe one of them's a moon, one of them's Earth, and so it's mapped perfectly so that the domes have that depth in them. And then you also have something that looks like where the saucer sections are of the Enterprise, of each Enterprise player 1, player 2. You have depth as well, but it's kind of hard to tell from the angle of these photos how much depth is there, but it does look like it's a little bit of a dome, maybe not quite as pronounced as the planets are. And then in the upper center portion of the playfield, you have this almost bowl-like feature that's sticking up from the playfield, and that's where you see where it says Borg Master. And so I'm not 100% sure how that works. In this one picture, it looks like it has shields around it, almost like Breakout does, where maybe that's constantly in motion, and so you have to time your shots to be able to first lower the shield and then hit the target and then get whatever that target is. So it could be a little bit of a unique feature for these style of games. But again, I need to throw out there is, as a disclaimer, that might totally change. The playfield could totally change. They might not use projection mapping in the final build if they go forward with it. Although I think if they did remove the projection mapping, it would lose a lot of the interesting tech appeal on there. Because that's one thing that arcades are constantly criticized for, is lacking that technological edge that they used to have. And I think that projection mapping, which you could also say is mixed reality, or MXR, and that would fall into the categories of VR and AR and all that. I think it's been severely underused in the arcade business. I mean, there are some out there. There's the Mystery Island by Touch Magics, which has a very impressive use of projection mapping, and struggling to think of anything else there, but it's really appealing. It looks really cool. It does something very different that you can't get done at home, because you would need that specially molded playfield surface for it, for one thing, and that's not something a game console is ever going to include in a box with your thing, or as in a digital download. Yeah, that it just adds that little layer of extra uniqueness that also goes beyond a license. I mean, obviously with this, having the Star Trek license makes it unique from any of the fishing games out there, but then, yeah, projection mapping just makes it cooler, makes it seem more high-tech, and of course with Star Trek, you would want something that seems more futuristic, more high-tech anyways, so I would be very surprised if this does reach a final production if they were to remove the projection mapping. But that pretty much covers what we know about Star Trek Battleground. Again, this may be quite a while before it sees a release because it is such an early build, and I mean, while some arcade games don't require a huge amount of time to develop like some console games do, who knows, they may sit on it for a while and refine and tweak things, and then there's always things that they have to deal with when it comes to the licensors or licensees, and that they have to figure out things with CBS or Paramount or whoever it is that's in charge of this particular one. And so I know that the Star Trek IP is a bit of a mess sometimes, or a bit of a minefield to navigate, but one thing that Rothros has been pretty good at in recent eras, pretty much almost since their inception, is dealing with licenses and getting that stuff taken care of properly. And so, yeah, let me know what you think about this in the comments below, and I'll also post an article on Arcade Heroes where you can look at these pictures statically or with more time if you wish, and then just stay tuned to arcadeheroes.com for more news. Lots of stuff is going on behind the scenes in the arcade business. Every manufacturer is working on something, and they're always working on something. And yeah, we'll see what makes the final cut and will be out there available for you to play. Again, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you on the next video.
Arcade Heroes.